be the most dramatic World War II story you've never heard of. And it's absolutely true. Let's talk about it with Jon Erwin on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome, etc.
And this is Steve Brown, etc., or I should say more accurately for this week, just etc. Dr. Brown is away, but he will be returning next week, so have no fear. I don't know, have you ever gone to a party and there's beverages and you take a sip of what you think is Coke, and then you sip it and you're like, oh, it's not Coke, and it ends up it's like Czech Cola. Well, I'm the Czech Cola. I get it. I know my place.
You make it
Brown is the real thing, but it's okay. We're gonna have an incredible show anyway. So thanks for hanging out with us. Our producer Jinx is with us in
drinking generic soda.
Little glass. Yeah. Jinx is back from vacation.
Holiday.
Am I pronouncing it?
Be all British. It's holiday.
It's a holiday. Great.
I was on a boat.
I've heard about those.
I got to where the boat leaves from.
Yes. Our video director and IT guru, John Myers, is in his tech bunker. If there was a problem, he'll solve it. And Dr. George Bingham is the president of Key Life. He also handles the ministry's finances. I used to think that independent filmmakers knew how to stretch a dollar, and then I met George. So
that's why you're drinking Czech Cola.
Yes. Yes.
You never struck me as being that Eastern European, but whatever.
That's a good.
It is a cold Coke. It's not a room temp Coke.
Yes. And Kathy Wyatt, of course, is the soft, feminine side of the program. Kathy, happy belated birthday to you.
Thank you. I appreciate
Big birthday
Did
last.
you make one of those single cupcakes for her?
And
I did.
the Key Life.
And to Key Life, 35.
That's right. This month, Key Life is
35 years old this month. Doesn't look a day over.
So am
34.
I. I'm 35 too.
Well, I had promised a good show, and here's why I say that. Our guest is Jon Erwin. Jon is half of the filmmaking duo, the Erwin brothers, and he serves as the CEO and co-founder of their production company, Kingdom Story Company. Back in 2010, nigh on 10 years ago, the Erwins began exclusively developing dramatic feature films. You guys know their projects: October Baby, Mom's Night Out, Woodlawn, I Can Only Imagine. Then just a couple months ago, I Still Believe, which is a great film. You should check it out. But Jon's newest project is not a movie, it's a book. And that book's name is Beyond Valor, a World War II story of extraordinary heroism, sacrificial love, and a race against time. Jon, thanks for hanging out with us.
Thanks for having me on the show. Happy 35th, Kathy. I'm glad to be here. This is a fun group. This is cool. I feel like I joined a party, not a podcast.
It's funny because we were, we had your brother on several months ago, right before the release of the movie. And I think it was during a break. We were all just kind of chatting, and he goes, "You guys are a bunch of pirates." And I was shocked because usually it takes people a lot longer to figure that out about us. So,
oh no, it's obvious.
It's very
I like
obvious.
Pirates. I aspire to being one. So
excellent.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that the story is a true story. It's a dramatic story, but for somebody who doesn't know it, there's a main character, real person again. Introduce us to who this central figure is.
In the book, Red Irwin is my grandfather. And thank you, first of all, for mentioning all the films Andy and I are typically introduced as the guys who made I Can Only Imagine and the other ones. So thanks for saying all of them.
And all in the course of 10 years, by the way. I mean, Marvel may approach that. That's a great resume.
So
I'm looking at his filmography. It's like one a year. It's like,
hey, you got to work, you got
Woody Allen, man. That's great.
You got, our great motivation in business is we don't know how to do anything else. And so yeah, you got to make stuff. And I'm privileged and honored that you would watch it and others would watch it. And this is a different way to tell a story in the book Beyond Valor. But the story that sort of it began them all is our grandfather's story. And my grandfather's name was Red Irwin. He received the Medal of Honor in World War II. The Medal of Honor is our nation's highest military award. It's given for acts of service above and beyond the call of duty. You think about the words of Jesus, if someone asks you to go 1 mile, go 2, and also greater love has no man than this, that he would lay his life down for his friend. And the Medal of Honor is America's way of honoring those stories and those incredible acts of courage. And I remember when I was probably 6 or 7 years old, my grandfather let me hold his Medal of Honor and said over my shoulder words that I didn't understand at the time. I knew it was horribly burned, but he said, freedom isn't free. And it would take a little while for me to understand the true meaning of those words. But I just didn't, unfortunately, from that age through my teenage years, I loved him, I knew him, but I didn't listen. I didn't care, honestly, about his stories. And even though he had such an incredible memory, I still feel a strong sense of guilt over it. It wasn't until his funeral that I remember it was sleeting rain, and I write about this in the book, that basically there was just incredible military honors. There were generals there, there were always other people there. There's a massive bomber from the 20th Air Force that got down underneath the clouds and tipped its wings. And I remember there was 2 buglers there, and they were echoing each other with taps right at the end. And they stood like bronze statues with no rain gear. And I remember our family went over to him and just said, I'm so sorry you had to do this, for our family. It must have been miserable. And they said, no, your grandfather's one of our nation's heroes. This is our honor. And it just sparked something like, what in the world have I missed? And it sparked a quest that took me and my brother around the country to talk to his the 2 crew members that were still alive, to his brothers, to, of course, my grandmother, my father, and to a lot of other B-29ers, people that were part of the program in the plane that he flew on, and discovered this incredible true story of heroism and love and a race against time, and what actually became, there's only been around 3,500 Medal of Honors ever given in our nation's history. And this was, to our knowledge, the fastest. It all happened in a week, and as opposed to the year it typically takes at minimum. And it was just an incredible story. And when my grandmother passed on a couple years ago, the thing that I'd never been able to read was all the letters that he wrote to her during the war. And in getting those, I felt like, okay, this is a massive movie. Maybe we'll make it someday, but let's write a book and let's get the story told. And I'm just so honored to finally be able to sort of right that wrong, that I wasn't listening as I should have when I was younger, and hopefully tell the story. And I think for anyone, I hope anyone that reads the book, beyond, I love stories like this. I love war stories. I read a ton. I read a lot of nonfiction, and I hope people enjoy it at that level. But also I hope they take the time to go back and, talk to your grandparents, talk to your great grandparents. They're like, listen, you can't really know where you're going till you know where you've been. And the legacy is something that you receive and that you give. And so it was a very meaningful part of my life to trace my own legacy through this story. And I can't recommend that process highly enough, especially since that greatest generation, there's so few of them that are still with us.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. You guys have staked out a niche in taking powerful true stories and translating them into a motion picture. And I got to direct a documentary one time, and we were interviewing people, and it felt like a kind of there was a weight to it. Mm-hmm. There was kind of a sacred act, and
stewardship.
You are trusting me. Yes, you are trusting me to represent your story, your life, to people, a lot of people, you won't even meet them. So that's with like total strangers that you just meet for a short amount of time. I imagine this is on a whole different level as far as the responsibility and gravity of the whole thing.
Yeah. Andy and I, with the movie that we're doing on the football player Kurt Warner, it's our 5th true story in a row. And so there's a power to the truth. There's just a power to true stories. You can't argue with the truth. And I remember when Bart Millard of Mercy Me said, I know God is real because of the change I saw my dad. I watched a monster transform into my best friend, and God's the one who did it. And that's the reason I wrote I Can Only Imagine. I thought, we have to make this movie. And so I just remember, those moments are so special to me, and there is a stewardship, but there's also a power to the truth. So it's worth it, but you just want to get it right. I remember with everything that we've done, I just want to get the story right. I'm a messenger of something, and Of course, we're going to take dramatic liberties in a movie, not in a documentary or a book. But you want to get the essence of the story right. And so with this book, the same thing is I want to get the essence of the story through to the audience and tell it as best I can, because there is a power to true stories, but there's also an awesome responsibility.
Yeah. You know, we'll talk about this on the other side of the break, but you know, yeah, you guys, there's the idea of a portrait versus a photograph kind of thing.
Yeah.
But if I'm understanding correctly, you know, for the book form of this, we're doing the picture version on this.
Books and you know, if you're a documentary filmmaker, I've done both. Documentaries are the hardest form of filmmaking because it's a process of discovery. They have to be true. And books are the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we will talk about on the other side of the break, that process of discovery, and we'll get into the particular details of this story that we're talking about. You're going to like it. It is powerful and it's memorable and inspiring. And if you're listening to this on the radio, then there's a pretty good chance that you're listening to this on the 15th, which is amazing timing and not coincidental, the 75th anniversary of VJ Day, Victory Over Japan Day. So this is the right story for the right time, and this is the right guy to bring it to us. We're talking to Jon Erwin. His new book is called Beyond Valor. We're going to get more into that on the other side of the break. You cannot miss this. You're in the right place because you are listening to Steve Brown, etc., and we'll see you on the other side. Thank you for joining us on Steve Brown, etc. We are talking to writer, director, producer Jon Erwin about his new book, which is called Beyond Valor, a World War II story of extraordinary heroism, sacrificial love, and a race against time. The subtitle itself promises a whole lot, and we kind of hinted at some of this stuff before the break. You talked about being burned, so I'm intrigued, and I know everybody else is. Jon, dive in a little bit, a level down, and start breaking out the story for us, if you would.
So my granddad, they called him Red Irwin, great looking guy, looked like Matt Damon before he left for the war. He, as many in his generation did after Pearl Harbor, he wanted to serve his country. He met and married my grandmother in a whirlwind romance, left about 3 months after they got married. He was deployed. He wanted to be a fighter pilot, as you know, look, we still do. My goodness, Top Gun. Everybody wants to be a fighter pilot, but he couldn't figure out really how to land the plane. So he sort of, after that, his dreams were crushed. He joined this experimental program called the B-29 program. And that was the aircraft that ended the war in Japan, and the most advanced airplane of its day. Beautiful aluminum aircraft. And he became a radio operator and flew many missions over Japan, including the fire raids over Japan. He was flying April 12th, 1945, in a raid to Koriyama, Japan. And one of his jobs as a radio operator was to drop a flare. Their plane was called the City of Los Angeles. It was the lead plane. So he would drop this phosphorus flare, and it would, as they approached the target, and it would be a signal for all the hundreds of other airplanes to form up. And done this many times. Phosphorus would burn white hot against the sun, so you could see it. It's horrible. It'll burn through steel. It'll burn up 2,000 degrees. It's a jelly. You can't put it out. It'll burn underwater. And on this moment, he dropped the flare. They hit an air pocket. The bomb shot back up into the plane, erupted into his face, and smoke filled the plane, and they went into a dive. And it was really just a question of, were they going to crash into the ocean, or was the plane going to erupt with 6 tons of bombs and take out several aircraft around them? He was very devout, and he just prayed a simple prayer, God help me, and went for the bomb instead of away from it, picked it up like a football, and in sort of an act of superhuman strength, started working towards the front of the plane, and felt just a presence with him on the plane. Got all the way to the co-pilot's window, threw it out, just as they were at 300 feet. I mean, just seconds from disaster. Smoke cleared the plane. They pulled up. There was a colonel on board named Strauss to observe the raid because they were the lead plane. And typically it was very mission over the man. You never turned around. LeMay was sort of like the Patton of the Pacific. And that's how he ran ran things. But that colonel was so moved that he said, I don't care if they court-martial me, turn this plane around. And let's try to save this man's life. And that led a series of irregular events. They woke LeMay up the next morning, presented him with this citation for the Medal of Honor. He was so moved by it, he got it to Washington, used his abrasiveness to get to Washington. All this happened the day FDR died. So it was Truman's sort of first day in office. Truman was famous for saying, I'd rather have the Medal of Honor than be the President of the United States. He saw this letter from this war hero in the Pacific. He was so moved by it that he got it through Congress in one day. Never happened before. Normally the Medal of Honor takes at least a year to sort of, it's almost like a trial. Was this above and beyond the call of duty? But it was so obvious. And so they sort of said, we're going to give this medal posthumously because everybody thought he was going to die. And LeMay said, no, I want to pin a Medal of Honor to this kid's neck before he died. Well, there was only one in the whole Pacific area, which was in the general's display case in Pearl Harbor. So they flew a secret mission, very long flight, stripped down a B-29, landed in pre-dawn hours, April 17th. And they got into the base, got into the general's office. Nobody was there. They couldn't find the key. They smashed the display case. They stole the medal, flew it back to Guam, and pinned it on his neck just 1 week after the incident happened. And so to our knowledge, is the fastest presentation ever of the Medal of Honor. And he was, my favorite part of the story is he was clinging to life. He had already endured many surgeries when he finally got back to the States, and he was down to about 85 pounds. And just many people in the burn ward, their wives would abandon them because they just couldn't deal with it. And this was his greatest fear. And my grandmother came in. I asked her, how did you do this? And it was so interesting. She said, I just didn't even think of any other way to do it. And she came in and found the only unburned portion of his face because he clutched think Phantom of the Opera, he clutched the bomb like a football. So the whole right side of his body was severely damaged. And but on the left side, his left cheek, the only unburned portion of his cheek, she kissed him, said, welcome home. I love you. Stayed with him. That gave him the will to live. And they had 5 children, all after the war, my dad being the second. And I just remember right before he died, he had a stroke. And I was sitting with him, sort of with him at night. My brother and I would rotate. And my grandmother came in and they just caught each other's eye. And they were just like two teenagers, just awestruck and thoroughly in love. And I just was like, what is that? And so that's his story. And that's the, it's a race against time. It's a love story. It's a war story. And I remember talking to Gary Luttrell, the president of the Medal of Honor Society, in Charleston at the aircraft carrier there where the Medal of Honor Museum is. And I just said, how do you choose to sacrifice yourself like this? How do you make this decision to do these superhuman things? Because when you read Medal of Honor citations, it's like they're acts of extraordinary courage. And how do you dive on a grenade? How do you do like what Desmond Doss did, who's a friend of my granddad's, who just played the movie Hacksaw Ridge. How do you do this? And how do you make a decision to do this? And he said, it's interesting. You don't make a decision. It's a time where there's not time to make a decision. So whatever's in your character in that moment just manifests itself. And that was illuminating to me because my granddad had spent his whole life sacrificing his own needs for the needs of those around him when he was, I think, very young, 10 years old. His father had died. And he had sort of become the caretaker of the family and provided, dropped out of school and provided for his family. And there was this thread of his life was you sacrifice your own needs for the needs of those you love. So when that moment came, that's the choice he made. And so it's just an extraordinary story. And I think I love reading nonfiction. I love biographies. I love war biographies. And so I hope that people that enjoy books will love the story.
Wow. That's a challenge, right? That the unexpected moment where whatever your character is, whatever's on the inside, it's an unguarded moment where you're suddenly going to be revealed what you are. And I hear that story. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is that? What would I do? What would I do in that situation?
Yeah, I don't know. Exactly. That's why I asked. what's in me. But it's interesting that life is moments, and those moments are a lifetime in the making.
My goodness. Well, you guys see why we're talking about how this is such a dramatic and compelling story, and there's more to come. So I sure hope that you will hang out with us. We are talking to writer, director, producer, author Jon Erwin about his grandfather, Red Irwin. The book, again, is Beyond Valor, a World War II story of extraordinary heroism, sacrificial love, and a race against time. Speaking of time, we are out of time for this segment, but there's good stuff ahead. So I know that you are going to want to hang out and join us again on the other side of the break. You are listening to Steve Brown, Etc., minus Steve Brown this week, and we will be right back. You are listening to Steve Brown, Etc. We're hanging out with writer, director, producer, now author. Enough already. I'm impressed. Jon Erwin. Keep up with him at kingdomstorycompany.com and on Facebook and Insta at Kingdom Story Company. We are talking about his book called Beyond Valor, an amazing true life World War II story centered around his grandfather, Red Irwin. Kathy.
Jon, I thought it was interesting when you talked about when you were younger and, wishing that you had spent more time and found out more, when you were younger, about your grandfather and then finding out more later on. Number one, just as an aside, I don't think you're all that unusual. There's something about youth that, we're just, for whatever reason, we're not interested. And I lost my mother just a couple of years ago, and she
I'm so sorry.
Served in the Navy in World War II. She doesn't have a story like your grandfather, but it was interesting to me because I realized in that last year before she passed away that I knew literally almost nothing about that. Mm-hmm. Because I just hadn't been interested, and I was an adult, obviously, but I hadn't been all that interested. And I wish that were not the case. I wish that there was some way to generate interest. I appreciate people like Gary Sinise and Tom Hanks and you guys for centering in on what you referred to as the greatest generation. And when my mother passed away and I spoke at her service, I talked about her service also, and also said that I felt like one of the things that, one of the really important things in her life that determined who she was also the fact, the same as your grandfather, that she had lived through the Great Depression. And that formed so much about how she thought, how she was trained and educated as a youngster. And I'm wondering, is there something... Why does it seem like there has to be something of that magnitude, something like war, that develops in people something that, and I don't mean that everybody that's under 35 is, doesn't care about anything, but there seems to be something in that generation, in that World War II Depression generation, that is uniquely different. And as we get farther and farther and farther into the 21st century, I think it becomes more and more obvious.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's cool that your story about your mother, and I'm so sorry for your loss, but I do think that there is something spectacular about the greatest generation. I think in a larger sense, I remember we did a movie called Woodlawn, and the first true story we ever did, and incredible story from the 70s. First black superstar athlete in Birmingham, Alabama, recruited heavily by Bear Bryant, who's portrayed by John Boyd in the film. And it didn't accomplish its goals in the box office, and it was sort of personally, sort of a failure. And we studied it for about 4 or 5 months. We just went into it, and we came up with this, and it was sort of like this playbook, and we solicited a ton of criticism and listened. And it was that failure that the playbook for I Can Only Imagine and the extraordinary success of I Can Only Imagine was birthed. And I use that as an example to say, whether it's the Great Depression with my grandfather, and he was a part of the New Deal, went to California because of the New Deal. Sometimes I think we misunderstand the value of suffering and failure and disappointment. Those are the things that shape us, and they can shape us for the better, and I think it's sort of like in 2 Corinthians where the idea that God comforts us in our suffering so that we can comfort others. And sometimes those with the strongest voice or those with the most impact. I think it's no coincidence that so many of our founding fathers lost children, and there's a level of character, and there's a level of endurance, and there's a level of grit. And I've found in my own life, failure is the great teacher. I learned the most in times of a failure, or my wife and I had to walk through, and he's fine now. He's 6 years old and he's great. But, unexpected health issues with our son, Sam, which led to sort of an emergency open heart surgery, not an immediate open heart surgery, I should say. And one of the scariest 2 weeks of my life, but it shapes you for the better. And so sometimes I think if you're walking through something really difficult that you don't understand, we can't see, in my industry, we call it a wider picture. We can't widen out and see what God's doing. And a lot of times I think he's molding us and giving us a certain strength of character that can only come through enduring hardship. And that is a part of that great generation story. I think the level of endurance that they had with the Great Depression led to a level of strength that they needed during World War II. And I think that applies certainly to a generational level, but also to sort of each of our own lives, that when you're walking through something that you truly don't understand, just know God can be developing things in you that you'll need later.
I always go back to story, right? We think there's these just events, and if there's struggle, well, certainly struggle, pain, that's something we should avoid because those are not fun.
But those are never the stories we tell, right?
Yeah.
We tell stories that
my story,
risk and peril and suffering,
It's unicorns and rainbows and high fives as far as I can see. That's a great, but that's not a story. That's no story.
The stories you make movies about?
Yeah, there's no, there's the conflict, there's the struggle. And when we resist that, when we resist what God is maybe sometimes allowing into our lives, maybe we really are missing out on something worthwhile. And certainly Irwin knew about that, and he embraced that struggle. And I think what we're talking about right now is evidence of when you embrace that struggle and see what God has for you, good things will come out. We're going to continue this story on the other side of the break. You are listening to Steve Brown, Etc. Listening to Steve Brown, Etc. And by the way, if you don't currently get our weekly email called Key Life Connection, how do I put this? You are just missing out on one of the best things about being alive. So listen, let's fix that. Go to keylife.org/subscribe, keylife.org/subscribe, and sign up for that right now. I believe.
Did you write the most recent email, Matthew? Is that why you're plugging it so hard?
Listen, it's not for me to decide, if these emails will stand the test of time. I am but a vessel through which genius flows.
There you go.
That's one of the best sales pitches I've ever heard. Like, if you're not doing this, you're missing one of the best things about life.
Find out, sign up, and maybe I'm a liar, but find out for yourself.
Find out. Yeah. Or that's just keep living your mediocre existence.
He did say
live right here. You could be right here.
He did say that this was Steve Brown, Etc. But,
You never know.
Steve's going to come back and go like, that's enough guest hosting for you, young man. All right. Jinx.
Yes. In the breaks, we let the guest interview us. So
yes,
it's I had short hair for the last time in 2000.
That's incredible.
So I've not cut my hair ever. Other people have, but my wife trims it from time to time. But yeah,
just trims it a little bit. Is it at the length that you want it?
YouTubers can enjoy that.
Or
nice.
It's a mane full of awesome hair to those.
I'm in the rock and roll industry, so that's how it has to be.
Cool, man. That's very cool. I'm doing a movie in the 70s. I could cast you as something.
You just keep that in mind, Matt.
I will.
1%.
Yeah.
Just
great.
flaunting it in the face of people like me.
It's cool.
I'll send
It's
some
cool.
headshots over. My question is, I mean, I mentioned earlier, your filmography is impressive. I mean, you're busy bees. Do you, after doing this book, do you prefer writing now? I mean, you gotta write a script for a movie anyway, right?
Yeah. You know, what's interesting? I do love in filmmaking, the privilege of being able to stare at a blank piece of paper, put words on it, and this amazing team of people comes around us, and we all make it real together in a point where it can move people. And what I love to do is entertain audiences and tell stories that uplift and inspire. And we feel like that our life mission is to sort of reintroduce and recapture the imagination of a generation with the gospel. And I love that verse in Acts where Paul, speaking of David, says David served the purposes of God in his generation. So you sort of got to own your time, and own the tools of your time, like radio and like movies. And so I love that job. To me, I don't see the difference in the job. I'm just a storyteller, and I get to tell stories that hopefully matter, that entertain in whatever vehicle they're packaged in, whether it's a documentary, a film, a TV show, a book. I want to tell stories that matter. I remember years ago, I was a music video director, working, just gig to gig. And I worked on a Christian movie called Courageous for the other brothers, Stephen and Alex Kendrick. And I remember Alex asked me the question. I was there to do to direct second unit, which means I was there to do all the stunt sequences, so that none of the church volunteers that worked on that film died. I was there to do all the dangerous stuff, and which I love. And I remember Alex asked me such a profound question. He said, "John, what's the purpose? What's your purpose and the purpose of your work?" And I couldn't answer the question. I had sort of, I'm not saying this is right, I had lied about my age when I was 15 to work for ESPN as a cameraman and just joined the circus and never looked back. I was this conservative Christian homeschool kid that all of a sudden was a part of a bunch of pirate ship called ESPN, which is why I like you guys. Anyway, it's one of those things where I just I didn't really have a game plan, and it was that moment where it was a moment where I fused my career with a calling, which is to tell stories that can change lives, and to tell them as best as we can, and to get better and better. And so I love writing. I write pretty much everything that we do, or co-write everything that we do. In this case, William Doyle is an incredible co-author, a much smarter man than I am, and incredible biographer for sure. But I do love the origin of the work, and having an idea and putting it on paper, and then making it real and giving it to people and seeing them hopefully moved by it. That's a privilege. We sit in service to the audience. One of the things that I don't embrace at all in my industry is a term called director's cut. I don't think it's not about me. It's about the only cut that matters is the cut that entertains the audience the most and moves them the most. And so to me, we serve the people sitting in the seats. It's a privilege to do that. And I've been given an amazing life. I truly can't believe I get to come to work every day and do what I do with such an amazing group of people, to tell stories like this. It's incredible. And it's because of the people that support, that buy the books or watch the movies or go to the theaters. We're in your debt, and God is at work in Hollywood in ways that I've never seen before, even in the midst, and maybe even more so because of what's going on with the shakeup of the coronavirus shutting down the industry. And so I think good times are ahead, and I hope that we can. I remember I was doing a film with Sean Astin, a couple films. I love that guy, Woodlawn. And he said, "I see you and Andy and the Kendricks and some others as frontiersmen and pioneers." And I said, "Thank you, Sean. That's what we want to do. We want to blaze a trail, for others." He's like, "John, most frontiersmen die out on the frontier, and it paves the way. The settlers come in and name roads after them and stuff." But I'm like, well, the trail will be clearly marked, and I'll be pointing to the summit. But I do think that I hope that we can be a small part of just sort of recapturing this medium of storytelling, and train others to do the same, and introduce. There's just incredible talent coming behind Andy and I. So to answer your question, though, I do love writing. I love that part of it, but to me, it's just one part of it. Ultimately, what I love doing, the whole thing, is storytelling, and I just think that storytelling is the way we understand life. And the storyteller, look, Jesus is the greatest storyteller of all time. And what I do, film, whatever, it's a new way, but to do a very old thing, which is just to tell a good story that can bring meaning to people's lives.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
George, you have something?
quick question. Well, and one thing I do want to clarify, which I've clarified before, is I think I'm the only person on here who doesn't have a script that I want to ask you to read, John. So
send them on.
Yeah. No, and
we'll get to writing one then,
Yeah,
join the group.
I'm the slacker of the group. Very quick question, I guess, is, I mean, you referenced the coronavirus, and I just maybe expand some on how you see that affecting the industry and so forth, and your work.
It's the biggest disruption in the history of the entertainment business, even bigger than World War II and the Great Depression. And it's going to reshape how people buy things. And I think there's opportunity. There's always opportunity in crisis. And certainly my heart goes out to all the crews. We had 2 films that were in active prep and hiring people. And, I remember being a cameraman for ESPN and I hope that we can get back to work very soon and safely. Making movies, but we'll get through this. I've learned if I've learned anything about life, the key is just to never give up. If you're called to do something, just don't quit. Keep dreaming, keep believing, and never, ever, ever give up, on what God's called you to do. So we'll do that.
That is such a good word and an apt way to wrap up this segment. Hard times reveal who we are, and they build character, and they make us into who God is making us into. So Red Irwin had an extraordinary set of circumstances that shaped his life, and through his life shaped others. Our struggles right now are radically different, but they are no less intense than a war. What story does God have for us? What role do we play? I don't know, but it's exciting. Isn't it exciting? We get to be a part of this. God is a storyteller, and we are writing our own stories as well. And it is this beautiful creative partnership that we are invited to. Jon, thank you so much for joining us. You guys go get this book. It's called Beyond Valor, and it's out right now. Welcome back. You have been listening to Steve Brown, etc. And listen, if you have never seen the video version of this radio show, it's kind of like the Grand Canyon. You got to see it at least once in your life. So do this for me. Go to youtube.com/Key Life Network to check it out. youtube.com/Key Life Network. And while you're there, there's that big, juicy subscribe button. You might as well smash that thing. So great interview with Jon Erwin and his book, Beyond Valor. The word that we didn't talk about much, but kept coming to mind for me was legacy. What is it like when you have such a powerful and inspiring legacy given to you? But listen, not everybody gets that kind of legacy. There's some folks who are born with not a good legacy, with a negative legacy, with a history that perhaps portends that you're going to go in that same bad downward spiral direction. But I want to say this to you: if you have inherited a terrible legacy, that is not your fault, and that is not necessarily your future. We kept talking about story and how we're participants in our own lives and a larger story that God is writing. If that has been your history, I just want to say that hand the pen over to the author. What has happened does not necessarily have to dictate the future. Give it over to him. Lean on the grace that he offers, and you could begin today writing a new story and creating your own legacy that you get to pass on one day, one that's way more positive than the one that you were given. Kathy, who is on tap for next week?
Next week, our good friend Sharon Hirsch will be with us. Her new book is titled Belonging, Finding the Way Back to One Another. And aside from the fact that she's a great author and a great guest, she's been on our program before, the foreword to this book was written by our very own Steve Brown of Steve Brown, etc. So it had to be pretty good.
It's like
for
getting
him
2 guests for
to
one.
take the time to read it and write the foreword. But yeah, we're looking forward to it. We love her. She's a great, great lady.
So we got Sharon next week, and we have Dr. Brown with us
Dr.
again.
Brown will be back, and Zach will be back from vacation.
And Zach will be back?
Yeah, Zach wouldn't miss Sharon Hirsch.
That's fantastic. Well, that's 3 and I won't be hosting next week. That's 4 reasons that you guys should check it out. So I know personally, you guys have made the sale. I'm going to check it out next week. I will join you guys again to hang out. And I hope you guys have still had a fun time this week with me, Chuck Cola. Check out Jon Erwin's book. Again, it's called Beyond Valor. Really good stuff. You're going to find a lot of inspiration. And thank you for joining us. Thank you guys for making this awesome. I enjoy it every time I get to be behind this mic, and it's a privilege, and it's kind of also fun too. So listen, until next time, hope you guys stay safe and stay dangerous.